Welcome to today's webinar for Autism Acceptance Month. I've created today's webinar from snippets of different training courses that I deliver externally. So if you want any further information about the content today, please just reach out and I can provide it to you. If we can just keep our microphones muted today, and we will have hopefully time for a few questions at the end. So if you can please only ask those questions or put them in the chat at the end of the webinar, because I'm not going to keep an eye on the chat. And if you put them in the chat during the webinar, I might just miss them. So I'm Katherine Patterson. I'm the Communications Manager for North England Forest District. I'm also a neurodiversity trainer externally, and I'm the Forestry Commission Disability, Neurodivergence and Carers Network co-chair, and the PCS Branch Equalities Officer, and I'm also a neurodivergence advocate. So I'm autistic. Being autistic is just part of me, of who I am. Like some people are shy. I have lived experience of neurodivergent conditions. So I'm diagnosed autistic. My 19-year-old son is autistic, has ADHD and dyspraxia, and my 16-year-old daughter has ADHD. And through living and fighting for our children's rights and support their entire lives, I have a real fire in my belly to advocate for neurodivergent people. So we'll look at some key concepts and definitions before we go into the nitty-gritty. So neurodiversity is about the natural and normal differences in human brain functions. It recognizes the wide spectrum of how people think, learn, and interact with the world. So we have neurotypical, which means people whose brains work in the way that society and medicine considers typical or normal. And this includes typical patterns of thinking, learning, and behavior. And most educational, workplace, and social systems are designed for neurotypical people. Then we have neurodivergence, and this refers to individuals whose brain work differently from what's considered standard or typical by society and medicine. Neurodivergence includes various neurological differences, including autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and Tourette syndrome. And together, neurotypical and neurodivergence form the full spectrum of neurodiversity. Neurodivergence is lifelong, but it may change at different stages and in different situations, or if the person's masking. Our ability to cope with different things does vary day to day, so it's really important not to make assumptions about an individual autistic person's skills, ability, or support needs, because they can change day to day. Neurodivergent traits often overlap across conditions, and many individuals may identify with more than one profile. So, for example, someone might be autistic and dyslexic. And these combinations form a beautifully unique neurodivergent profile for each person. And this emphasizes the importance of personalized support and understanding. So, as I've just said, neurodivergent profiles refer to the different ways that people's brains function, process information, and interact with the world. It's different from what's considered typical. Autism is a neurodivergent profile. Before we go into autism, it's really important to say that people, or many people, use profile names and terms that are used in medical manuals. I personally don't like them because they use the word disorder. Although disorder is used in medical terminology, many neurodivergent people don't see themselves as having disorder and actually consider the medical terminology to be unhelpful and unhealthy. So while I have a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, I don't consider myself to have a disorder, because being autistic is something I am, not something that I have that needs to be fixed or cured. So let's go on to autism now. So more than 1 in 100 people are autistic, and that's according to the National Autistic Society from 2025. And autism influences how people experience and interact with the world. Autistic people are very different from each other. So, you know, just because you've met one person with autism doesn't mean that you know all people with autism. But For a diagnosis, they must share differences from non-autistic people, and that's in how they think, how they feel, and how they communicate. Autism is not a learning disability, and it's not a mental health condition, but around a third of autistic people also have a learning disability. Autistic people experience significantly higher rates of mental health conditions such as anxiety and depression, and that's because of having to navigate a world that is built for neurotypical people and not having their needs met. Studies also show that suicide risk is 3 times higher in autistic people compared to non-autistic people. So autism is understood as a spectrum, which I'm sure lots of you have heard. What autism as a spectrum means is that every autistic person's experiences different combinations of autistic traits and in different intensities, as you can see from the image on the screen. This doesn't mean that everyone is a bit autistic, just like you can't be a bit pregnant. You can have symptoms of pregnancy, like nausea, but you can't be a bit pregnant. I hear this a lot. People try and be helpful and they say, oh, but everyone's a little bit autistic. And on the surface, it can look true. So lots of people dislike change. Everyone notices noise. Everyone gets overwhelmed sometimes. Everyone feels exhausted. But here's the difference. It's not that it happens. It's how much, how often, the intensity, and the impact it has. For autistic people, it can feel like change isn't just uncomfortable, it causes high levels of anxiety. Noise and other sensory input isn't just irritating, it can actually feel overwhelming and even painful. Autism isn't about having some of these experiences, it's about the intensity, the frequency, and the depth of impact on everyday life. When it starts to affect going to work or going out in the community, only being able to wear certain items of clothing, interacting with others and feeling safe in everyday environments, it's not the same. It's about recognizing when those experiences are louder, deeper, more consuming, and harder to recover from. So autistic people experience the world through a different neurological lens, and this brings meaningful strengths that are valuable in the workplace and society. Some strengths of being autistic include attention to detail and strong focus. So many autistic people are very good at noticing small details and are able to concentrate for long periods, and this is called hyperfocus. They can spot things that others might overlook. This can be especially helpful in jobs like checking data, making sure details are correct, or working with technical information. Hyperfocus is one of my key strengths as an autistic person. It's the reason why I deliver excellent communication plans, because I can sit for hours researching, engaging with stakeholders, and writing. That's what I enjoy. Through my children's lives, I've become hyper-focused on their needs and their support. I have researched, I've written in-depth documents, correspondence, applications for things like educational health and care plans or EHCPs. And when we've been denied or turned away for support by organizations such as CAMS, I've become hyper-focused and fought until we have got them the support that they've needed. Many teachers and other professionals have actually applauded me for this, saying that our children would have never received the level of support they have because so many children and young people are fobbed off. And this is thanks to my hyper-focus. The next one is honesty, integrity, and reliability. So autistic people often prefer being honest and clear. This means others can trust them to be fair, straightforward, loyal, both at work and in personal relationships. Many autistic people have a strong sense of justice, and this means that they care deeply about fairness, honesty, and consistency, and often feel compelled to speak up when something's wrong. This trait can make them highly principled, trustworthy, and resistant to peer pressure, helping them to stand up for others and act with integrity, even in difficult situations. And this can actually be a major strength guiding autistic people towards meaningful roles, ethical decision making, and this has a positive impact on the people and systems surrounding. This is another one of my strengths, and this is the reason why my children have received the support they have had in their schooling years and now in college and university. And my strong sense of justice also made me decide to become a workplace representative in the trade union. The next one is deep knowledge and intense interests. So when autistic people are interested in something, they often learn a lot about it. So there's strong curiosity and ability to focus deeply can help them to become very skilled in these areas, which can be really good for their careers. It can be great for employers and also great for personal enjoyment. Then the next one is strong memory and logical thinking. So many autistic individuals have excellent memories. They can remember facts, steps, patterns, etc. really well. And they also tend to think in a clear, logical way, which helps with problem solving. Fantastic in the workplace. Pattern recognition and creative problem solving. A lot of autistic adults are often good at noticing patterns or connections that others don't see. So they may approach problems in unique ways, which can lead to creative and effective solutions. And then sensory strengths. So some autistic people can hear, see, and sense things more strongly than others. For example, they might notice very fine visual details. And these abilities can be helpful for creative tasks in the workplace or work that requires careful attention to sensory information. Autistic challenges are not deficits, they're differences. Challenges can affect daily functioning, particularly when environments are not designed with neurodiversity in mind. So some of the things that you might notice in autistic adults is social communication challenges. So you might see signs such as a monotonal voice, so somebody speaking in one tone, their voice not sort of going up and down. They might talk over people, so not wait their turn to speak, not doing small talk, saying inappropriate things, coming across as blunt or rude, or looking totally disinterested in what others are saying, and saying whatever they think, so having no filter. And then also avoiding niceties in conversations. So this is something that I've had to learn, that in the past, when I first started work and I used to sort of walk into the workplace after a weekend, and instead of doing the normal thing of asking how everyone's weekend was or how their holiday was or whatever, I would just go straight into the workplace and say, do you have that piece of information for me? But I've learned that that's not socially acceptable. And so now I've had to learn about those niceties in conversations and so use them now. Avoiding eye contact. So some autistic people can make eye contact, but it is really stressful. So it's important not to force somebody to make eye contact. Some autistic people prefer routines. They may look anxious when these routines are disrupted. Many autistic people dislike change, and many autistic people plan everything and need to know the detail of everything, because this just reduces the anxiety. Many autistic people have sensory processing challenges, which we'll speak about in a bit. They may look uncomfortable when they're in environments with large sensory input, such as loud noises or complex noises, bright lights or strong smells. And then the last one is executive functioning challenges, which we were going to cover in the next slide. But one of the things you might notice a person has is with expressing their emotions or understanding the emotions of others. And this can lead to challenges in forming relationships and connections. So to create an inclusive workplace, we must recognize autistic strengths, not just the challenges. So I've just covered so many amazing strengths that autistic people can bring to the work environment. Focusing on our strengths leads to better outcomes in employment and also to our well-being. So executive functions are managed by the prefrontal cortex of the human brain. And this allows people to plan, to focus, remember instructions, and also to multitask. A lot of people, autistic people, have executive functioning challenges, which is also known in the medical world as executive dysfunction. It's a direct result of our neurological conditions because of how our brain develops and operates. So the first one is self-monitoring. And this is understanding in a moment how you are progressing. So, for example, the ability to use the time allocated to you to complete a task by a deadline. So you sort of checking in with yourself. Then you have impulse control. And this is the ability to think, to reflect, and then make choices before you act. Organization, keeping track of items and tasks, and that can be mentally or physically. So somebody that battles with organization, you might see they might have a really messy desk or a really messy, dirty works van. And then the next one is flexible thinking. And this is adjusting to unexpected changes in your tasks, in your environment or your schedule, and then shifting your attention as required to make sure that those changes are managed. Then planning and prioritizing, and this is to set a goal and then to determine the steps to achieve that goal. And the prioritizing part of it is to understand how important or urgent a task is and the amount of time it will take to complete. And then task initiation and completion. So to begin a task and then the ability to keep the focus required to complete it. So it's not just about beginning a task, but having the concentration to continue it to the end. Emotional control. So this is control over the responses you make to the emotions that you feel. I can battle with this. So, for example, a couple of weeks ago, I had a hospital appointment an hour away. It was at a hospital I'd never been to, a place I didn't know. And I was really stressing out because it was an MRI scan, which I was worried about because of being in a confined space. On the motorway, my car overheated. I managed to pull over and fill it with water and get it to the hospital. But I had to kind of just leave that while my mind was racing about the car, went for my MRI, got out of the MRI. And then I thought, what am I going to do about my car? What am I going to do about my car? And I started panicking. I could feel my emotions going and thinking, how on earth am I going to control this? I phoned my husband and he got the RAC to help me. And then the RAC, while I was waiting for the RAC to phone, I started going around in my mind. What happens if the RAC can't come? What happens? When are they going to come? Who's going to come? What happens if when they come, they can't fix my car? And then I'm going to have to be towed back to Cumbria in a car, and I'm going to sit in a car talking to somebody, making small talk with somebody that I don't know for an hour. What happens if I have to stay here in a place I don't know? What's the hotel going to look like? What's going to smell like? What the lighting going to be? And I started all my emotions started going up and going up and going up. And eventually when the RAC phoned me to say, we're on our way, don't worry, I just burst into tears. I couldn't manage the emotions that I was feeling. I couldn't control those responses. And luckily, the person on the RAC was absolutely brilliant, on the telephone was absolutely brilliant and said to me, okay, you're okay, we're on our way, go to the hospital cafe, find yourself hot chocolate or tea, whatever, and then either sit in the cafe or sit in your car. We are on the way. So they were absolutely brilliant with me. But that's just an example of that emotional control. I just couldn't do it. And then lastly, we have working memory. So this is the ability to retain and access key information while you are using it. So information or knowledge that you've learned, being able to draw that knowledge and using it in the moment. So sensory processing difficulties. So humans have 8 senses. I know that many people will say, no, we only have 5. But there are 5 senses that take information from the outside world and 3 that come from within us. And these create an updated picture of ourselves and our world. Sensory processing is something that we all do. Our brains are very busy every moment of the day, taking information via our sensory systems, processing it, making sense of it, and helping us to respond. For some people, the brain finds it difficult to register, organize, or respond to sensory information, and this can make everyday life more challenging. So SPD commonly affects neurodivergent people, but you can have SPD without any other condition. There's 2 categories in SPD. The first one is hypersensitivity hypersensitivity. And this basically means that you react too strongly, too quickly, or for too long to sensations that most people don't find bothersome. And an example I like to share is about our son, William, who had a hypersensitivity to the auditory sense, to the olfactory sense, which is the smell sense, and that he really has never liked cheese. We were having a wonderful walk in the Lake District in the middle of nowhere, literally no other houses or anything around. And William suddenly said to us, "I can smell cheese." We're like, well, he can't smell cheese because none of us have cheese sandwiches. There's no shops around here. There's no factories around here. We're literally in the middle of the nowhere. He can't smell cheese. And he kept on saying, "I can smell cheese. I can smell cheese." And he started getting overwhelmed. So we used the art of distraction. We're like, right, how many steps to the next tree? How long is it going to take to get to the next fence post, etc. And after a while, and I mean like a while, miles and miles of walking, we came across a farm. And at the farm gate, there was a sign that said homemade cheese. So this farm was making cheese and was selling it from their farm gate. And William was able to smell that from many miles away, which was absolutely extraordinary. Then we have hyposensitivity, and hyposensitivity means not noticing sensory input as much as other people. So someone may react more slowly, less strongly, or not even at all, even to even things like pain or extreme heat or cold. So I used to work with a neurodivergent person and used to notice around lunchtime her getting hangry, really irritable. And this was because she just didn't have that sense, that ability to notice that she was hungry. And so we had to kind of say to her, right, you need to eat something because you're getting hangry. You also might notice in the workplace your colleagues who walks around in shorts and a t-shirt when it's freezing or snowing outside. That's just because they have a hyposensitivity to cold. So stimming is self-stimulating behavior. It's a common coping mechanism that many autistic people use to self-soothe and to help reduce anxiety and regulate our emotions. So stimming can be repetitive physical movements, sounds, or actions. So you might see physical stimming, such as someone rocking on their chair. People notice when I sit in meetings, I sit with my legs crossed and I jiggle my leg. You might see somebody playing with their hair, rubbing their hands together, picking or biting their nails. Those are all physical movements. And then you also might hear autistic people stimming through walking around the workplace, sort of humming, while they're walking around, or singing or clearing their throats regularly. It's important not to ask someone to stop stimming, because when autistic people are told not to stim, they lose a tool that helps them to feel grounded and in control. And this thing can cause increased internal tension, frustration, and emotional exhaustion. So, as I've said, stimming is a self-protective and essential part of how many autistic people navigate the world. One of the questions I sometimes get asked in training is what to do if someone's hurting themselves when stimming. So, if someone is stimming in a way that's causing real harm to themselves or to others, the situation changes. The goal isn't to stop the stim outright, but to keep them safe while respecting their needs. So in this situation, you would try redirecting or modifying the stim so it stays safe. So for example, if you notice somebody chewing their hand and making themselves bleed, you would perhaps provide them with a chew sensory toy to rather use that. Masking is another protective self-preservation strategy used to avoid negative attention or bullying, and it's used to blend in and be more socially accepted. Masking is also referred to as camouflaging. Autistic people can learn how to mask by observing, analyzing, and mirroring the behaviors of others. And this can be through real life or watching people on TV or in films, etc. Masking is both conscious, so intentional effort to hide your autistic traits, or an unconscious, automatic, or habitual survival mechanism. So something that you've learned from a young age, possibly. So conscious masking is actively suppressing your stimming, So sitting in a meeting thinking, I mustn't jiggle my leg because everyone's going to stare at me, I'm going to get laughed at. Or planning conversations, like writing social scripts before you go to a party, or mimicking neurotypical social behaviors, such as laughing at a joke because everyone else is, even though you don't get the joke. And then unconscious masking acts as an automatic second nature response to social situations, often done without active thought. I must say that masking does take immense energy, and it often leads to exhaustion, burnout, and mental ill health conditions. So although it's a self-protective strategy, it takes its toll. So autistic people experience meltdowns, shutdowns, and autistic burnout. These are not a choice. It's not manipulation. It's not acting out. They are signs of overwhelm. It's the body trying to survive. Meltdowns, shutdowns, and burnout are caused by a combination of factors, such as sensory overload, living and working in a world where needs aren't met, and also from masking. When our demands build up faster than we can recover, the result can be a meltdown, a shutdown, and eventually autistic burnout. So an autistic meltdown is an involuntary response to extreme overwhelm. It's not a tantrum, and it's not something that somebody chooses. It is the body's fight or flight system responding to overload. So meltdowns may include raised voice or crying, repetitive movements, anger or distress, the need to escape the situation, loss of ability to communicate effectively. And every autistic person expresses meltdowns differently, and the intensity varies. As I've said, meltdowns are not bad behavior. It's overwhelm that has been made visible. So a meltdown is the fight or flight response. A shutdown is more like the freeze response. So autistic shutdown happens when the nervous system is overwhelmed and can't keep going. Instead of exploding outward like a meltdown, the body shuts down into a low energy protective state. So shutdowns may look like going quiet or non-responsive, not being able to speak or make decisions, needing to leave a room, appearing distant or switched off, and difficulty moving or initiating tasks. I often have shutdowns after big social or work events. So as part of my role as communications manager, I do often have to go to networking events, etc. And I can do it, and I often enjoy them. However, afterwards, I will need to go home and I just lie on the sofa with my dog, and my family knows not to talk to me, not to ask me any questions, just to leave me alone, because I actually cannot engage with the outside world. Shutdowns are often misunderstood because they can be missed, and they also can be very quiet because it's that person shutting down. A shutdown is the nervous system's way of protecting itself, and this is where kindness and patience are often essential. Autistic burnout is debilitating exhaustion, and it's a loss of abilities and lasts a long time. So a recent study that was made on autistic burnout outlines that it has 3 core characteristics, and that is 1, a state of deep exhaustion, feeling drained, depleted, and unable to recover, even with loads of rest. The loss of abilities, so losing skills that were previously manageable. And this is why many people describe autistic burnout as a loss of functioning. So a big takeaway from this study is that autistic burnout is real and it is debilitating. It can happen after months or years of coping with constant demands, particularly masking, sensory overwhelm, social pressure, or environments that aren't accessible. So some signs of autistic burnout can include extreme fatigue, and I don't just mean feeling a bit tired, I mean extreme fatigue. Decreased tolerance for sensory input, so the bright light that you usually find bright, you find it overwhelmingly bright. Feeling unable to function at work or in daily life, and needing significantly more recovery time. Autistic burnout can last for weeks, it can last for months, and it can even last for years without proper support. Burnout is serious and often overlooked, and it's actually often misdiagnosed as depression. So preventing it is far easier than recovering from it, which is why creating neuro-inclusive environments is so important. So disability has a strict definition under the Equality Act 2010. And the definition says, a person has a disability if they have a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term negative effect on their ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. So what does substantial and long-term mean? Well, substantial is more than minor. So for example, it takes much longer than it usually would to complete a daily task, like a work task. And then long-term means that it lasts or expected to last for 12 months or more. So the legal definition of disability under the Equality Act means that autistic people are likely to meet the conditions. It's also important to note here that the fact that somebody can mitigate or dampen the effects of their autism does not prevent them from having a disability. Many autistic people can mask, and their ability to carry out a task in one day can change the next because of the reasons we've spoken about. It's important that employers understand the laws surrounding autistic people in the workplace, because although a lot of autistic people do not regard themselves as having a disability, the law still provides them with the same level of protection against discrimination as people with physical disabilities. So, does a person need a diagnosis to be considered disabled under the Equality Act 2010? No. An autistic person does not need a diagnosis to be considered disabled under the Equality Act. An employee or staff member is not legally required to provide proof of diagnosis, and they also might have their reasons for not sharing their diagnosis. They might have been bullied in the past and don't want to share that, or they might not have been put forward for a promotion, so they don't want to share their diagnosis. So the first action we can make to be neuro-inclusive in the workplace is through reasonable adjustments. So reasonable adjustments are changes that an employer makes to remove or reduce barriers which are linked to somebody's disability. It's about removing the barriers, not gaining advantage. It's about recognizing that people experience the world in different ways and that fairness isn't found in sameness. It's important to remember that they're tailored to the individual because, like I've said before, all autistic people are different. So you can't just go, well, that person's autistic, so we'll give them X, Y, and Z. They have to be tailored to the individual. Reasonable adjustments actually will often benefit the entire workforce, not just the person that they're created for. An example of that could be like providing interview questions in advance of an interview. That actually benefits everybody, not just the neurodivergent person. Employers must make reasonable adjustments by law under the Equality Act 2010, and employers must act when they know or could reasonably be expected to know that somebody is disabled, or if a disabled person asks for the adjustments. So who pays for the adjustments? The employers are responsible for paying for reasonable adjustments. And when we're thinking about reasonable adjustments, make sure that you talk to the autistic staff member, discuss openly, and always consider individual needs. You might also feel that you need an occupational health assessment to help you with recommendations for adjustments. And then it's important to use a workplace adjustment passport, and this is en route to record the agreed adjustments. So some examples of reasonable adjustments in the workplace. The first thing we could look at is the work schedule. So you could do things like allow extra breaks, adjust start and finish time. So my brain works much better earlier on in the day. So I work from 7 until 3 instead of a lot of my colleagues who work from 9 until 5. And then you could also encourage flexible working. You could make adjustments to the actual role and to their person's responsibilities. So you can review their workload and agree their duties, prioritize tasks, and any task that they find more challenging. You could be really creative and shape those tasks to somebody else in the team, and sort of move tasks around the team, and be creative with tasks and duties. Then visual representations of daily activities. So just remember that not everyone thinks in words. Some people think in pictures. So you might, instead of having a whiteboard in your office or in your staff area about what the tasks may be for the day, you might rather want to use pictures if the person thinks better in pictures. And then you could also give clear instructions like step-by-step guidance, or if the person's going out into the forest to do a work task, what PPE they might need, making sure that this is listed for them. And then adjustments to the working environment. So you could have things like room dividers to enhance soundproofing. You could provide quiet spaces and not making people use a hot desk. Hot desking is something I really struggle with. I need to know that when I go into an office, I've got my desk with my things and I'm going to know what I'm being surrounded by. So hot desking is a real trigger for me. You could provide daylight desk lamps, or you could adjust your light levels to make sure you have dimmer lights. You could also provide flexible seating like bean bags and flexible desks. So I've got a standing desk, and this helps with something which I'm not going to go into today called proprioceptive input, and that just helps me to feel grounded. So when I'm standing, I feel a lot more grounded. And then you could also offer home working. And then the last one is equipment and technology support. So things like speech recognition, speech-to-text software. So in the Forestry Commission, we provide Dragon Professional. And then you could also provide different formats of information and so on. It's really important when you do provide equipment and technology as a reasonable adjustment to make sure that you provide the training that goes alongside as part of the reasonable adjustment. So a workplace adjustment passport keeps a record of how someone's disability affects them at work, the reasonable adjustments they've agreed with their employer, any reasonable adjustments they think they might need in the future. So for example, your adjustments might change after surgery, or if you're having cancer treatment. Completing a workplace adjustment passport is completely voluntary. It's the staff member who owns the content, and they also decide who they want to share it with besides their line manager. So they might choose to share it with their HR business partner. They may choose to share it with a mental health first aider. And then once you've agreed your adjustments and they are documented in your workplace adjustment passport, then that's an agreement between you and the employer. If your line manager changes, you do not need to change your workplace adjustment passport. Those adjustments have been agreed, and you do not need to renegotiate them. Someone's reasonable adjustments might need to change over time. So, for example, they're in a new situation, or something changed at work. For example, they've moved to a new role, or the employer introduces a new way of working. You might get new equipment, or you might move to a new workplace. Or otherwise their condition or disability changes or gets worse with time. So for example, a mental health condition. So then the workplace adjustment passport would change. I always tell people to make sure that you review your workplace adjustment passport at least every 6 months. And the easiest way I find of doing this is to make sure that you do it at your mid and end of year reviews, because then you know that it's going to happen every 6 months. So creating a neuro-inclusive workplace culture. So a neuro-inclusive workplace is one where autistic and other neurodivergent people feel respected, understood, and able to thrive. And this requires intentional action, everyday awareness, and a commitment to continuous learning. So these following principles can help you to create a culture where everyone feels valued and safe. So the first one is create a safe environment. So psychological safety is essential. Colleagues should feel that they can share their needs without fear of judgment or being bullied or stigma, etc. This includes encouraging open conversations, responding with empathy, and making sure that workplace processes support and not penalize those who think or work differently. The next one is use correct and respectful language. So language shapes culture. Using inclusive and accurate language reduces stigma and promotes respect. So, for example, you should always ask autistic and neurodivergent people about their language preferences. Some prefer identity first language, so I'm autistic, so that's what I prefer, while other people prefer person first language, so they might say I'm a person with autism. The most respectful choice is the one the individual prefers. Then the next one is normalize reasonable adjustments. So reasonable adjustments should be seen as standard practice, not special treatment. And as I've said, the reasonable adjustments can benefit individuals across the organization and often improve working conditions for the entire teams. By normalizing adjustments such as quiet spaces or alternative meeting formats, you send a really clear message that different styles of working are welcome and supported. Then attend autism or neurodivergence training. So training helps build confidence, awareness, and practical skills. It also enables staff to better understand autistic and neurodivergent experiences and apply inclusive approaches in everyday work. So when you encourage your teams to attend training, it also reinforces that inclusion is everyone's responsibility. And then highlight a commitment to supporting neurodiversity. So leaders and teams should actively communicate their commitment to neuroinclusion. So this can include reviewing processes for accessibility and ensuring neurodivergent voices are heard and represented. You could use things like the Forestry Commission Neuro-Inclusive Meetings Guidance to show inclusion. And leaders can also be vulnerable and share their personal reflections. So, for example, writing a blog on roots on their own divergent diagnosis journey, or they might model adjustments openly in the workplace to say to everyone, oh, I'm going to use my noise cancelling earphones today to help me to focus. And then lastly, in the Forestry Commission, we're very lucky to have some amazing staff networks. So there's no point in having staff networks as nobody knows about them. So it's important to promote the Disability, Neurodivergence and Carers staff network. And I'm going to shorten it to the DNC because it's a bit of a mouthful. So the DNC network provides safe spaces, peer support, advocacy, and opportunities to influence organizational change. Promoting the network encourages colleagues to connect, to share experience, and access resources. And this is done through, we've got a Teams channel and we've also got a Roots page as well. Our network also helps leaders in the Forestry Commission to better understand the needs of disabled and neurodivergent employees and carers. So, for example, we've just worked with HR to run surveys and focus groups to help deepen understanding of the challenges disabled people in the Forestry Commission face and therefore make improvements. So, before we finish, I want you to think about a story that frames today's training. The story of the boy and the starfish, which I'm sure lots of you have heard. So it basically goes that a man is walking along a beach covered in thousands of stranded starfish, and ahead of him is a young boy picking them up one by one and throwing them back into the sea. And the man says to the boy, "There are too many, you can't possibly make a difference." And then the boy picks up another starfish, gently tosses it into the waves and replied, "It made a difference to that one." So this story isn't about starfish, it's about impact. It's about seeing value where others overlook it. About understanding that small changes can transform someone's world. For so many neurodivergent people, creativity, unconventional thinking, and unique problem solving aren't weaknesses, they're strengths, they are gifts. And yet, when systems, workplaces, or even well-meaning colleagues insist on doing the things the right way or the typical way, we accidentally recreate the dynamic in the story. We teach neurodivergent people, directly or indirectly, to suppress the qualities that make them exceptional. We reward compliance over creativity, masking over authenticity, fitting in over standing out. And slowly, people stop bringing their full selves. They shrink. they dim. They try to fit into a box that was never designed with them in mind. And when that happens, we don't just lose potential, we lose brilliance, innovation, and the richness that comes from minds that see the world differently. Just like the boy on the beach, every small shift we make, every adaptation, every moment of understanding, every act of inclusion can make a profound difference to someone, and that difference matters. So as we end today's webinar, I want us to hold on to one key idea. Our role is not to make people fit the system. Our role is to make the system flexible enough to fit everyone. Thank you.